He sat in the back of the room, still as a statue, his heart pounding louder than the auctioneer's voice. The spotlight moved from face to face, but his eyes stayed locked on one, hers. She smiled, unaware, laughing, graceful just like before. Everyone else saw a woman on stage. He saw 20 years of silence. Tonight wasn't about winning. It was about finally breaking the silence, no matter the cost. Before we begin the story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Drop a like and subscribe to support emotional storytelling. Now sit back and enjoy the story. Julian Hart had it all. The penthouse overlooking Central Park. The Forbes cover framed in his office. The kind of wealth that turned heads and unlocked doors. But behind the headlines and billion-dollar deals was a secret. A quiet, aching truth that money could never silence. He had loved her since they were 17. Her name was Evelyn Moore. And she never knew. Back in Willow Creek, they'd been just two teenagers in the same senior class. She was the girl who painted murals after school, the one who always smelled faintly of lavender and acrylic paint. He was the quiet math prodigy, always one row behind her in every classroom, watching her from a distance, memorizing her laugh, her hands, the way she used to tuck her hair behind her ear when she was deep in thought. He never told her. Not when she won the art scholarship and moved to Paris. Not when he got accepted into Stanford. He thought there would be time. He thought life would loop them back together. But it never did. Years passed. They both changed. She became a teacher, traveling the world with her art. He became a venture capitalist, building empires with precision and a heart grown cold. But the feelings never died. He had dated, slept beside strangers, attended galas with women who wore diamonds like armor. But he never once looked at someone the way he looked at her all those years ago in the dusty school gym during prom night, when she had danced barefoot with a group of friends, and he stood by the exit doors, pretending not to stare. Then, one morning, a glossy invitation landed on his desk. A charity gala, auctioning off dinner dates with local figures. And there, in delicate calligraphy, was her name. Evelyn Moore, artist, volunteer, former Willow Creek resident. Julian's world stopped. He read the name 10 times, then once more just to be sure. She was back. She was going to be on stage. And for the first time in decades, fate was offering him a seat in the front row. But Julian didn't want the spotlight. He bought a ticket under an alias. No red carpet. No media. Just a seat near the back and a heart that refused to stay calm. The ballroom was filled with laughter and crystal chandeliers. Waiters moved like shadows, serving champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The room smelled of perfume, ambition, and artificial smiles. But Julian saw none of it. His eyes were fixed on her. She looked older, yes, but more radiant than ever. Her hair was now a warm chestnut brown, cascading in soft curls over her shoulders. Her dress was simple, a deep navy blue that matched the color of her eyes. But it was the way she moved, like the world didn't own her. That same grace, that same quiet fire. She didn't see him, didn't know he was there. And that was just as well. He wasn't ready to speak. Not yet. The auction began. People clapped. Some laughed. A local news anchor was auctioned for dinner at $1,200. A famous chef went for $2,800. Then the spotlight shifted. Next up, we have Evelyn Moore, the host announced cheerfully. Artist, teacher, and world traveler. A one-on-one dinner with her at Le Soleil, one of New York's finest rooftop restaurants. Starting bid at $500. Julian's stomach twisted. He had prepared for this. Or so he thought. But now, as she walked up the steps with that gentle smile, the same one she had at 17, his hands refused to move. His body felt cemented in place. People were already bidding. $600. $800. $1,000. She laughed politely, placing a hand on her chest, clearly overwhelmed by the attention. Julian watched her and remembered the way she used to sketch flowers on her notebook margins. The time she helped him cheat on a pop quiz just because he looked nervous. The moment he almost kissed her during a summer bonfire but lost his nerve. What if this was his last chance? What if, after tonight, she disappeared again? He clenched his jaw. His fingers reached for the paddle beneath his chair. But his past whispered louder than the room. She won't remember you. She has a life now. You're not 17 anymore. He closed his eyes, breathed in, then lifted the paddle. $10,000, he said. The room fell silent. Heads turned. The auctioneer blinked. $10,000? Julian stood up slowly, his face still hidden in the shadows. Yes, he said again, clearer this time. $10,000. Evelyn's eyes scanned the room, curious. She couldn't see his face, but something shifted in her expression. A flicker, a pause, as if something familiar brushed past her heart. Going once. Julian didn't move. Going twice. Not a single other paddle rose. Sold. To the gentleman in the back. The room applauded, but Julian barely heard it. His chest was pounding. His hands were cold. He hadn't thought this far ahead. He had no plan, no speech, no charming line. All he had was the truth he'd buried for half his life, and the fear that maybe it was too late. As Evelyn stepped down from the stage, she glanced once more toward the dark corner where he stood. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if chasing a memory she couldn't quite place. He looked away. He had bought the dinner, but he hadn't yet found the courage. Not to tell her the truth. Not to show her who he was. Not to say the words, "I loved you. I always did." Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, the dinner would change everything. Julian didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of his penthouse, listening to the steady hum of the city outside. Horns, sirens, life happening. But inside, there was only silence. Not the kind that soothed, but the kind that reminded him of every word he'd never said. He had paid $10,000 for one dinner. Some would say it was insanity. Others might call it vanity. But to Julian, it wasn't a purchase. It was a confession waiting to happen. The next day, he received an email from the event organizer confirming the date and time. Thursday, 7 p.m. at Le Soleil. His assistant had already RSVP'd. His driver would be ready. The suit was pressed. The reservation was booked under her name. All that was left was showing up and telling her the truth. Thursday came far too quickly. Julian spent the afternoon reviewing documents he couldn't focus on. He skipped lunch. His tie didn't feel right. He changed jackets twice. For a man who commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar contracts, this felt like the most fragile negotiation of his life. At 6:30, he was in the car. By 6:45, he was outside the restaurant. And by 6:59, he stood at the top of the stairs, staring at the entrance as if it were the gates of fate itself. He saw her through the glass. Evelyn. She was already seated at the corner table on the rooftop terrace, wrapped in the golden glow of the setting sun. A soft scarf draped around her neck. Her hands folded over the menu. She glanced around with a quiet curiosity, unaware of who her mysterious bidder would be. Julian felt the urge to turn around, to vanish into the night, to leave it all unsaid once again. But then she smiled at the waiter. And just like that, the 17-year-old inside him begged for a second chance. "Good evening," he said, approaching the table with careful steps. Evelyn looked up. At first, her face was blank, a smile polite. Then something flickered, a narrowing of her eyes, a small gasp. She tilted her head, searching his face. "Julian?" He swallowed. "Hello, Evelyn." She stood slowly, eyes wide. I didn't expect. You were the bidder." He nodded, unsure of how to explain it all without sounding unhinged. She stared at him for a long second, then let out a soft laugh, nervous, surprised. "Wow, I haven't seen you since we graduated," he finished for her. She nodded, still dazed. "Right. I mean, I saw your name in the news sometimes, but I never imagined." She gestured to the table, still in disbelief. "Please sit." He did. The silence between them was thick, but not cold. It was the kind that carried weight, memories left unspoken, years that hung between sentences. Evelyn was the first to break it. "So you paid $10,000 to have dinner with me," she said with a teasing smile. "I feel flattered. Or maybe terrified." Julian chuckled, finally letting a bit of the tension ease. "I suppose it does sound a bit dramatic." "You suppose?" She laughed again, shaking her head. "Julian, I was sure some tech billionaire would bid to impress investors. I didn't expect someone from my past." He looked at her, his voice softer now. "I didn't bid to impress anyone." She looked back at him, and for a second, her smile faded. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the stillness, the depth of something unspoken. The waiter arrived. They ordered wine. She chose something light. He nodded without really tasting anything. As the conversation unfolded, the years between them began to unravel. They spoke of Willow Creek, of old teachers, friends, the dance they never had at prom. She told him about her life in Florence, her work with underprivileged kids, her passion for teaching art in places where no one cared for it. He listened, truly listened, and every word she spoke reminded him why he had never stopped loving her. But he still hadn't told her. Not the real reason he was there. Evelyn set her glass down and leaned forward slightly. "Julian, why now?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" She tilted her head. "We haven't spoken in years. I've lived in 5 countries since high school. You're a literal billionaire. Why come to this event? Why bid for me? Why not just send a message? Or, I don't know, forget me like everyone else did?" He hesitated, then lowered his gaze to the table. "I never forgot you," he said, barely louder than a whisper. The words hung in the air. Evelyn didn't speak. Julian raised his eyes again, meeting hers. "I came to the auction because I saw your name. And the moment I did, everything I'd buried came back. Evelyn, She shook her head gently, holding up a hand. "Wait, don't say it yet." He paused. She took a breath, as if bracing herself. "Let me ask something first." He nodded. "Back in high school, do you remember the art room? That day, after class, when I was working on the mural, and you stayed behind?" He blinked. "Of course. I asked you if you ever liked someone secretly," she said, her voice softer now. "And you said maybe. I remember that. And I remember thinking maybe it was me. But then you never said anything. Never followed up. And when I left for Paris, you didn't even write." Julian's chest ached. "I was scared," he admitted. "You were leaving. And I wasn't enough. I didn't come for money. I didn't even know what I wanted in life. I thought you deserved more." She looked at him with a mix of pain and disbelief. "So you let me go, because you thought you weren't enough?" He nodded. She laughed bitterly. "Julian, I cried on the plane. I looked for you that morning. I waited. And when you didn't show up, I convinced myself I had imagined it all. That I was stupid for thinking you ever felt something." Julian reached for her hand. "I did," he said. "I did. Every day. I just didn't know how to say it. And then time kept passing, and it felt too late. But when I saw your name on that invitation, I knew I had to try, even if all I got was one dinner, one moment, just to say it." She stared at him, breathless. "To say what?" she whispered. He held her hand gently, finally meeting her eyes without fear. "That I loved you, Evelyn. That I always did. That I never stopped." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her eyes shone with tears she wasn't ready to shed. Not yet. The waiter arrived with their entrees, but neither of them touched their plates. The candlelight flickered between them, casting long shadows on the white linen tablecloth. The food sat untouched, growing cold, forgotten. Julian's confession still hung in the air, thick and trembling, like a violin string stretched to its breaking point. Evelyn didn't speak. She stared down at her hand, still resting inside his, as if trying to decide whether to hold on or pull away. The soft clinking of glasses from other tables, the murmur of distant laughter, all of it seemed to fade into a low hum compared to the roaring silence that bloomed between them now. Julian wanted to fill it, to say more, to apologize for everything. But he knew this was her moment now, and so he waited. Finally, Evelyn took her hand back. Not sharply, not in rejection, but slowly, like someone placing a fragile object back in its box. She leaned back in her chair and looked away, eyes focused on the skyline rather than him. "Do you know how long I wanted to hear you say that?" she asked, her voice quiet and steady. Julian blinked. You did." She nodded, her lips forming a bitter smile. "You were the only boy who ever made me feel like I wasn't too strange, too quiet, too messy. I thought maybe you felt something too. But when you didn't say anything, I convinced myself I was just one more girl in your yearbook. Nothing more." Julian opened his mouth to speak, but she held up a hand. "I don't need explanations, Julian," she said. "I'm not angry. Just tired. Tired of wondering what could have been if one of us had been braver." He nodded slowly. "Me too." They both fell silent again. Not the awkward kind. Not anymore. This was the kind of silence that only comes after truths are finally spoken. After a while, Evelyn turned back to him. "So what now? What do you want from me?" Julian didn't hesitate. "Nothing." She looked confused. "I didn't come tonight expecting you to fall into my arms," he said softly. "I came because I couldn't carry the weight of it anymore. I thought maybe if I told you the truth, even if it didn't change anything, it would be enough." Her expression softened. "I just wanted you to know that you mattered to me," he added. "That you always did." She reached for her wine and took a small sip, her eyes studying him over the rim of the glass. "You've changed," she said after a pause. Julian raised an eyebrow. "For better or worse?" She smiled gently. "You used to be shy, a little awkward, always hiding behind a book. Now you're," she paused, gesturing toward him vaguely, "this powerful man in a suit with the world in his hands." He gave a quiet chuckle. "I don't know if I'd go that far." "No?" she asked, setting her glass down. "Then why did you bid $10,000 just to tell me something you could have written in a letter 20 years ago?" That stopped him. Julian's jaw tightened for a second. He didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, a letter wouldn't have worked. A phone call wouldn't have been enough. He needed to look into her eyes. He needed her to feel what he felt, to see it wasn't some nostalgic whim or romantic fantasy. "I guess," he said finally, "because I wanted to make sure you knew I was serious. That I'd never forgotten you. That I was willing to risk everything, even my pride, just to tell you the truth." Evelyn nodded slowly. That's something the old Julian never would have done. He met her gaze. "I'm not the old Julian." They sat with that for a while. Not rushing. Not forcing. Just breathing in the moment. Eventually, Evelyn pushed her plate aside and rested her elbows on the table. "You know," she said, "I used to dream about us ending up in the same city someday. I imagined we'd run into each other at a bookstore or a gallery. You'd recognize me immediately, and we'd talk like no time had passed." Julian smiled. "I imagine that too. Only in mine, I finally found the courage to ask you to dance." She raised an eyebrow. "Dance? Julian, you hated dancing." "I still do," he admitted. "But I would have done it. For you." The words hung between them like old stars, faded but not gone. She looked at him, then really looked at him. The hardened lines of his jaw, the silver threading his temples, the sadness that lingered behind his eyes even now. "You know," she whispered, "I'm not the same girl you once knew." "I know," he said. "And I don't want you to be." That made her blink. "I don't love the memory of you, Evelyn. I love the person you became. The one who traveled the world, who painted murals in refugee camps, who gives her students a reason to believe in art." He paused, then added, "I may have been silent all these years, but I've never stopped watching your light from afar." Tears welled in her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, but he saw. Julian reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled something out, small, folded, worn with age. He placed it gently on the table between them. She looked at it, puzzled, and slowly unfolded the paper. It was a sketch, a quick pencil drawing, of her, from behind, sitting under the willow tree behind their school, her hair in a messy bun, her hand holding a brush, painting on a canvas only partially visible. She gasped. "You drew this?" she asked. He nodded. "The day you were painting the mural. I skipped class to sit behind the bleachers and draw. I wanted to keep the moment. It was the first time I realized I was in love with you." Her fingers trembled as she held the paper. It was fragile, faded, nearly torn at the edges. But the emotion it carried was eternal. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," he replied gently. For a long time, she just stared at the sketch, then at him, then back at the sketch. She folded it again, but this time with reverence, as if it were something holy, and tucked it into her purse. When she looked up again, her expression had changed. The softness was still there, but now there was something else, uncertainty, perhaps, or possibility. "I should go," she said quietly. Julian's heart sank, but he didn't protest. She stood up and gathered her scarf. He rose with her. At the edge of the table, she paused, looked back at him. Then she leaned in, gently, slowly, and kissed his cheek. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't closure. But it was something. "I'm going to think about all of this," she said, her voice barely audible. And then she turned and walked into the night. Julian stood there, his cheek still tingling, watching her disappear into the city. He didn't chase her. Because sometimes, when you've waited 20 years, you can wait a little longer. Julian didn't move for a long time after Evelyn left. The rooftop terrace slowly emptied around him, the murmurs and laughter fading into the hum of the city below. Waiters cleared tables, the host thanked guests, and the sky darkened to a deep navy scattered with distant stars. But Julian remained standing, as if her kiss on his cheek had frozen him in place. It had been gentle, kind, not a promise, not a rejection, just something in between. A moment suspended in time. And yet, it changed everything. He returned to his penthouse alone, but not quite the same man who had walked out earlier that evening. There was something new in his chest now, subtle, delicate, and dangerous. Hope. The following days moved slowly, yet he couldn't seem to catch up with them. He went to meetings, nodded at presentations, answered investors with words he didn't remember saying. His team noticed his distraction, but no one dared ask. He checked his phone more often than he liked to admit. She hadn't called, hadn't messaged, but he told himself she needed time. Evelyn had always been thoughtful, reflective, the kind of woman who painted with her soul before making decisions with her head. He respected that. But it didn't stop him from aching every second she stayed silent. 1 week later, he was at his office when his assistant knocked. "Mr. Hart, there's a delivery for you." "I thought it was personal, so I brought it up myself." She handed him a small, flat parcel wrapped in brown paper. There was no return address. Only his name, written in ink he recognized instantly. Evelyn's handwriting. He closed the door behind him and sat at his desk, his hand strangely unsteady as he unwrapped the package. Inside was a canvas, a painting, of him. But not the Julian Hart who stood before boardrooms or posed for magazines. This was a younger version, 17, sitting on the school bleachers, sketching in a notebook, eyes lifted toward something just beyond the canvas. His face was full of longing, vulnerability, and something that resembled love. He touched the corner of the canvas, gently, afraid to breathe. Taped to the back was a note. "I saw you that day. I just didn't believe what I saw. Now I do." Julian exhaled, slow and shaking. His throat tightened, and he leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the painting. She had seen him, all those years ago, behind the bleachers, trying to capture her in a sketch. And somehow, she had remembered. It was the most intimate thing anyone had ever given him, not just the painting, but the acknowledgement, the understanding, the validation of everything he had held inside for 2 decades. He reached for his phone, then stopped. She hadn't given him a number. No message asking to meet. Just the painting. It was her way of saying, "I remember too. I feel it too." But what now? The next day, Evelyn called. Her voice was quiet, but not cold. "I didn't know if I should send it," she said. "The painting." "I'm glad you did," Julian replied. They spoke for over an hour. About everything. About nothing. About Willow Creek. About her classes. About how hard it was to be hopeful in a world so quick to disappoint. He listened more than he spoke. She didn't promise anything, didn't hint at romance. But she asked about his day and laughed at his jokes and paused before hanging up, like she wanted him to say something more. So he did. "Can I see you again?" There was a beat of silence. Then, yes. They met the next evening. Not at a five-star restaurant, not at some gala or event. Evelyn asked to meet at a quiet little diner in the East Village, somewhere real. When Julian arrived, she was already there, sitting in a corner booth, sipping coffee. She wore a simple cardigan, her hair in a loose ponytail. No makeup, no pretense. She was beautiful. He slid into the seat across from her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she smiled. "You're overdressed." He looked down at his blazer and tie, then chuckled. "I wasn't sure what the dress code was for second chances." She looked away, her smile fading slightly. "Let's not call it that." "Not yet." He nodded, understanding. They talked. About art. About childhood. About the years between them and the people they'd become. She told him about her students, the way some of them painted like they were saving their lives. He told her about his mother, who passed before he made his first million, and how he still wished she'd seen him succeed. At some point, their hands met on the table. Not by accident. Not by force. Just naturally. Like gravity. Weeks passed. Then months. They met regularly, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for long walks in Central Park, sometimes just to sit and talk on a bench. Julian found himself rearranging meetings, skipping dinners with clients, even postponing flights, just to spend an extra hour with her. He didn't push for more. He didn't ask for labels. He didn't say, "I love you" again. He simply showed up. Again and again. Consistently. And that, more than anything, began to heal her. Because Evelyn wasn't just afraid of love. She was afraid of being forgotten again. One rainy afternoon, as they sat inside her small apartment filled with half-finished paintings and the scent of tea, Evelyn spoke the words he hadn't dared hope for. "I used to think love was loud," she said, curled up beside him on the couch. "That it was dramatic, chaotic. Something that swept you off your feet." He looked at her, listening. "But now," she continued, "I think love is quiet. It waits. It doesn't demand. It doesn't vanish when things get hard." She turned toward him, her eyes soft. "You waited, Julian." He touched her hand gently. "Not very well." She smiled. "But you did. And maybe that means I can trust this." She leaned in slowly and kissed him. No hesitation. No past between them. No future rushing ahead. Just now. The moment they had waited for all their lives. Later that evening, as they sat on her tiny balcony under the soft drizzle of spring rain, Evelyn rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you think," she whispered, "if we had said something back then, we'd be here now?" Julian was quiet for a moment. Then he said maybe. "But maybe we weren't ready then." She nodded. And together, they watched the rain fall, not with regret, but with gratitude. Because sometimes, love doesn't arrive when it's convenient. It arrives when it's true. The rain had stopped, but Evelyn didn't move from Julian's shoulder. The city glistened beneath them, lights reflecting off damp rooftops and streets, as if the whole world had been gently washed and made new. It was quiet. Only the distant murmur of taxis and the occasional gust of wind passed between them. Julian glanced down at her. She was still awake, her fingers lightly curled around his. Her face was peaceful, almost childlike in the glow of the balcony's tiny hanging bulb. This moment, was one he never thought he'd get. Not in youth, not in adulthood, not even in fantasy. But it was real, and that terrified him. "You're quiet," Evelyn murmured, breaking the stillness. "I'm afraid if I speak, this will end," Julian replied. She smiled. "It's not a dream." "Are you sure?" "No," she admitted. "But even if it is, it's a good one." She shifted slightly, turning to face him more fully. "What happens now, Julian?" The question echoed like a ripple in still water. They had been cautious these past few weeks, getting closer, slowly peeling back layers of the past, learning who they were now rather than who they had been. But Evelyn's question hinted at something more. A future. Julian took a breath. "That depends on what you want." She searched his eyes, as if looking for something she was scared to find. I want to trust this. I want to trust you. He nodded. You can. I want to believe this isn't just nostalgia, she added. Julian hesitated. Then he said something that had been circling his mind for days. Let me show you where I've been keeping you all these years. She blinked. What do you mean? He stood slowly and reached into the inner pocket of his coat. From it, he pulled out a slim, black leather notebook, worn around the edges, the kind of item you don't carry for style, but because it means something. He handed it to her, without a word. Evelyn took it, her brow furrowing. She opened it gently. Inside were pages of sketches. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. All of her. Her laughing. Her painting. Her at 17. Her imagined at 25. Her face from memory. From dreams. Her standing under trees. Her seated in cafes. Her dancing barefoot. Her crying. Her older. Her wiser. Her always her. Tears welled in her eyes before she got past the 5th page. You drew all of these? She whispered. Julian nodded, his voice thick. Every time I thought I was over you, I opened that book again. And every time I missed you, I added another page. Evelyn pressed the book to her chest. You never gave up. No, he said. But I did stay silent. For far too long. She shook her head, overwhelmed. Julian, this is more than I ever expected. More than I thought anyone could feel for me. Then let me be the first to prove you wrong, he said, taking her hand. Again and again. The days that followed were tender and tentative. They didn't rush. Julian didn't ask her to move in. Evelyn didn't push for declarations. They simply lived together. He joined her at her art workshops, helping clean brushes, watching her teach children how to mix colors and emotions. She attended one of his talks at a university and teased him later for sounding like a serious robot in a fancy suit. He loved the way she teased him. She loved the way he watched her like she was made of light. There were still doubts, still scars. Evelyn sometimes pulled away when things got too intense. Julian occasionally fell back into his old rhythm of hiding behind logic. But they talked. Always. And it made all the difference. One Sunday afternoon, they returned to Willow Creek. It was Evelyn's idea. I want to remember who we were, she said, so I can see how far we've come. They drove down familiar streets that had changed and yet somehow stayed the same. The high school was still there, now repainted in brighter colors. The old library had become a cafe. The mural Evelyn once painted on the back of the gym, faded but still visible, greeted them like an old friend. Julian parked the car and they walked hand in hand, ending up at the willow tree behind the school. The one from the sketch. She stared at it for a long time, then sat down at the base of the trunk. Julian followed. For a while, they didn't speak. They just listened to the wind rustling the branches, the same way it had so many years ago. I used to think this place held all my regrets, Evelyn said quietly. Julian looked at her. And now I think maybe it held our beginning. He leaned in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, Our beginning never ended. It just got interrupted. She smiled and rested her head on his shoulder. And in that small town, under the tree where everything started, they both let go of the weight they had carried for so long. The next morning, they sat at a tiny kitchen table in the inn they had stayed at overnight. Coffee in hand, the sun spilling through the window. Evelyn looked at Julian with something soft in her eyes. I've been thinking about something, she said. Oh, Julian teased. That usually means trouble. She laughed. I've been thinking about the painting. The one I sent you. He nodded. It's hanging in my living room now. I want to paint another one, she said. His brow lifted. Of me? No. Of us. Julian froze, his heart skipping a beat. Not of us now, she added. Of us back then. 17. You behind the bleachers. Me, on the ladder. I want to paint the moment we missed. He was quiet for a moment, then reached across the table and took her hand. I'd like that, he said. I think it would help me heal the part of me that waited all these years. And maybe, he added, it'll help me forgive the part of me that stayed silent. They sat there, fingers intertwined, coffee growing cold between them. But neither cared. Because they weren't just living in the past anymore. They were writing something new, something quiet, something real, something unbreakable. It had been years since Evelyn had touched a canvas with shaking hands. She had painted in war-torn villages and sunlit classrooms, in cafes and parks and noisy city studios. But this painting, this one, felt different. It wasn't for a gallery or a fundraiser or even for herself. It was for them, for the moment they never had, the teenage memory suspended in what-ifs and never said words. And now, she was trying to capture it with strokes of color and memory. The painting was almost complete. Julian stood in her small studio, watching her work. She had tied her hair back in a loose knot, wearing the oversized sweatshirt he'd once teased her about, splattered in paint from years of creation. Her brow furrowed in concentration, and every so often, she would glance between the canvas and an old photograph they had found from their school yearbook. Two kids, blurry in the background of a group picture, him holding a sketchbook, her laughing at something just out of frame. That moment, unremarkable to anyone else, was sacred to them. Julian crossed his arms and leaned against the doorway. "Do you always paint this quietly?" She didn't turn around. "Only when it matters." He smiled, then walked in slowly, approaching the canvas from behind. She stepped aside so he could see it. And when he did, something in his chest pulled tight. There he was, 17 again, seated on the bleachers, sketchbook in hand, eyes focused on a girl he thought would never look back. And there she was, on a ladder in front of the mural, sunlight pouring over her hair, her back to him. One foot slightly lifted like she was about to float into the sky. But what made it beautiful was the space between them. Not just physical space, but emotional space. Space filled with longing, fear, hope, silence. The entire painting told a story only they could understand. He swallowed hard. "It's perfect." "It's unfinished," she corrected. Julian tilted his head. "How so?" "I haven't painted her face yet," she said. He looked closer. She was right. Evelyn had left her own face blank, just the shape, no features. "Why?" he asked gently. She set her brush down and stared at the canvas, her arms folded. "Because I don't know who that girl was anymore," she said. "I've changed so much. And maybe I'm scared that if I paint her now, she'll look at him and not recognize who he became." Julian's heart ached. He stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "She will," he whispered, "because she always knew who he was, even when he didn't." Evelyn closed her eyes. His arms stayed around her, as if he was trying to hold every broken version of themselves together at once. After a long pause, she said softly, "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why didn't you ever fall in love again?" Julian stayed silent for a few seconds, then said, "I think I did in pieces. But none of them ever felt complete. I always measured them against you, even when I didn't realize I was doing it." She turned in his arms to face him. "And you don't resent me for that?" He shook his head. "No. I just wish I hadn't waited so long." Evelyn cupped his face with paint-stained fingers. "Then don't wait anymore." Later that night, they sat on her couch, wrapped in the same blanket, sharing a bowl of soup she'd insisted on making despite burning the first pot. Julian didn't mind. He would have eaten cardboard if it meant staying close to her. The TV played quietly in the background, some old, black-and-white film they weren't really watching. Julian was the first to speak. "Do you think we'll make it?" She looked at him. "Make what?" "This. Us. A second chance after all this time." She rested her head on his chest. "I don't believe in second chances." Julian's heart sank. "You don't." She smiled against his shirt. "I believe in first chances. Because we never had one to begin with." He chuckled. "Semantics." "No. Truth," she whispered. "This is our first real chance. And I don't plan to waste it." He kissed her forehead. In that moment, the world outside could have disappeared and neither would have noticed. The next morning, Julian returned to his office for the first time in weeks, with a different energy. People noticed. His assistant whispered to another that he was smiling again, like really smiling. His board members commented on how sharp and focused he was. He even caught himself humming in the elevator. For a man who had built his life on solitude and structure, it was unnerving and exhilarating. That afternoon, he called Evelyn. "I was thinking," he said, "we should take a trip." She laughed. "A trip?" "Yes. To Florence. You always said you left part of your soul there." There was a pause. "You'd go with me?" "I'd go anywhere with you." Silence. Then her voice softened. "Julian, I think I'm falling in love with you." He closed his eyes and smiled. "That makes two of us." A week later, they were walking the cobblestone streets of Florence, her hand in his, stopping every few feet to admire a sculpture or a small gallery. She pointed out her favorite buildings, told stories from her time living there, showed him where she used to buy coffee every morning before teaching. He listened like every word was a treasure. At sunset, they stood on the Ponte Vecchio, watching the river glow with molten gold. Julian reached into his pocket and pulled something out. A ring box. Evelyn's breath caught. But when he opened it, it wasn't a ring. It was a tiny pendant. Inside, rolled up like a scroll, was the original sketch he had drawn of her at 17. "I wanted you to carry it," he said, "in case you ever forget how long I've loved you." She took it in her hands, eyes wide with tears. "I won't forget," she whispered. "Not again." He leaned in and kissed her, the sky behind them painting streaks of orange and rose across their future. Back home, Evelyn finally finished the painting. She added her face, soft, curious, unsure, but full of light. And when she stepped back, she realized something she hadn't before. The space between them in the painting wasn't empty. It was full of everything that brought them to where they were now. Everything they had endured separately. Everything they had healed together. She named it the space between then and now, and hung it in Julian's home, right above the fireplace. Winter came earlier than usual that year. The trees shed their last golden leaves, the sky dimmed to a shade of pewter, and the air carried that first unmistakable bite of cold. But for the first time in years, Julian didn't feel it, because Evelyn was in his life, and with her came warmth, quiet, consistent, like a soft fire that didn't burn but glowed. They spent weekends bundled in scarves and wool, walking through Christmas markets, sharing hot cocoa, getting lost in bookstores. He bought her a vintage fountain pen she'd admired behind a dusty glass case. She gave him a scarf she'd knitted herself, slightly uneven, but he wore it proudly every day. At night, she painted while he read beside her. Sometimes he would pause just to watch her, her brow furrowed, her lips slightly parted in focus, the way she bit the inside of her cheek when mixing colors, the subtle joy that came from being in her element. He never interrupted, just watched, just loved. One evening, as snow flurried gently outside the apartment windows, Evelyn rummaged through an old box labeled Willow Creek. She had been organizing her old things, sorting through fading notebooks, class photos, and dusty art supplies she never had the heart to throw out. Julian sat cross-legged on the floor, watching her smile at old memories. And then she froze. "What is it?" he asked. She pulled out a small envelope, yellowed, sealed, with her name on the front. Her handwriting. She turned it over. "No postmark," she whispered. "No stamp." Julian tilted his head. "A letter." Evelyn sat slowly on the floor beside him. I wrote this the night before I left for Paris." He looked at her carefully. "To who?" She turned the envelope toward him. His name was written across the front. "Julian." He reached for it, but stopped halfway. "You never gave it to me." She nodded. "I left it in your locker. At least, I thought I did. I was too afraid to hand it to you myself." Julian took the envelope now, his fingers trembling. "Do you want to read it?" she asked. He looked into her eyes. "Only if you're ready." She hesitated, then nodded. Julian carefully unsealed the envelope, unfolding the letter inside. Her voice filled the silence as he read silently. "Julian, by the time you read this, I'll be on a plane. Or maybe in Paris already, trying to remember how to say milk in French. I wanted to tell you this in person, but I couldn't. So I'm writing it down, hoping you'll forgive me for being a coward. I liked you. I liked you so much. And I think part of me always did. You never said anything, and neither did I. Maybe you were scared too. Or maybe I imagined it all. But I wanted to tell you that I noticed you. I always noticed you. The way you watched the world, quietly. The way you protected the kids who got picked on. The way you looked at me like I was a painting, and you were afraid to ruin it by getting too close. If you ever feel the same way, maybe you'll write back. Or find me. Someday. But if you don't, that's okay too. I just didn't want to leave without telling you how I felt. Be kind to yourself. Always. Evelyn. Julian's throat tightened. He looked up from the letter, eyes glossy. You wrote this, and I never saw it. I figured, she said softly. You never answered. I would have, he said, his voice breaking. I would have chased you to Paris. I would have written 100 letters back. Evelyn reached over, cupping his cheek. Maybe we weren't ready then. But we're ready now, he whispered. She nodded. We are. Julian folded the letter carefully, returning it to its envelope. I want to keep this. It's yours, she said. It always was. Later that night, Evelyn brought out a box of her childhood sketches. Since we're time traveling, she joked, placing the box on the coffee table. They sifted through the drawings, crude watercolor pieces, old notebook doodles, even a few unfinished portraits of teachers and classmates. Then Julian paused. He pulled out a folded paper, older than the others. The ink was faded, but the drawing was clear. It was him, at 17, sitting behind the bleachers, eyes fixed forward. You drew me, he asked. Evelyn bit her lip. I guess we were both silently obsessed. He chuckled. Obsessed and completely incapable of communication. She laughed, then leaned in and kissed him. It was soft, familiar, and full of the weight of years, years they hadn't shared, years they were now reclaiming, one piece at a time. A few weeks later, Evelyn received a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a short note. Dear Evelyn, I wrote this 20 years too late, but I hope it still counts. Yes, I felt the same. I still do. J. She folded it, pressed it to her lips, and smiled. Some words take a lifetime. Others take only a moment. That weekend, Julian invited Evelyn to an event, a small art gala hosted by a children's foundation they both supported. He wore a navy suit and a tie she had picked out. She wore a deep green dress, simple but elegant, the pendant with his old sketch resting above her heart. They arrived together, hand in hand. No secrets, no distance, no more space between them. As they entered the gallery, someone called her name. Evelyn Moore. She turned to find a young woman, early 20s, holding a notebook. I'm an art student. Your piece, the space between then and now, changed the way I think about memory and emotion. I just wanted to say thank you. Evelyn blinked, surprised. Then smiled warmly. Thank you. That means everything. The student turned to Julian. You're the man in the painting, right? He glanced at Evelyn, who nodded proudly. Yes, he said. That was me. You two are like a real-life love story, the girl said with a grin. Evelyn looked at Julian, her eyes gleaming. We are, she said. Just a few chapters late. Later, as the event came to a close, Evelyn stood beside one of her paintings, a soft, abstract piece titled The Letter That Was Never Sent. It featured layers of textures and faded script, the shape of a folded page embedded in the center, surrounded by strokes of blue, gray, and gold. Julian came up beside her. It's beautiful. It's us, she whispered. He slid an arm around her waist, pulling her close. I'd wait all over again, he said. She leaned into him. But this time, she whispered back, you don't have to. The apartment was filled with soft jazz, the scent of cinnamon tea, and the golden glow of late winter sunlight filtering through the windows. Evelyn stood barefoot in the kitchen, dancing gently to the music as she stirred something on the stove. Her hair was tied up loosely, paint still smudged faintly on her wrist from the morning's work. Julian sat at the dining table, watching her with quiet amusement. You always cook like you're performing for an audience, he teased. I am, she said, glancing back at him with a playful smile. An audience of one, and a very spoiled one at that. He chuckled. Guilty. She brought the pot over to the table, ladled soup into 2 ceramic bowls. One she had made herself at a pottery class she once dragged him to, and sat across from him. They ate in silence for a while, the comfortable kind that only comes when 2 people know each other deeply. Julian reached for her hand halfway through the meal, lacing his fingers through hers without a word. "I keep thinking," Evelyn said quietly, "about all the things we missed." Julian raised an eyebrow. "Missed? Yeah. We never had the college years together. No first apartment as a couple, no Sunday mornings on a student budget, eating burnt toast in mismatched pajamas. No fighting over who forgot to do the dishes." She laughed softly, but there was a shadow in her voice. Julian squeezed her hand. "We didn't have those years, no. But we have now." "I know," she said. "It's just strange, isn't it? To be building something new out of pieces that were once forgotten." Julian paused before responding. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think it makes us stronger. We lost time, yes. But we gained clarity. When I look at you now, I'm not guessing how I feel. I know. And I know that I'm not going anywhere." She smiled, tears pooling gently in her eyes. "And I know that I love you," he said softly. It wasn't the first time he had said it, but somehow it still landed like it was. And this time, Evelyn didn't just smile. She whispered back, "I love you too." Over the next few weeks, their lives began to overlap in ways that felt natural. Evelyn left a sweater at Julian's apartment. He brought her his favorite mug to keep at her studio. She learned how he took his coffee. He learned the rhythm of her painting days and the subtle signs when she needed space. They were learning how to share a life. But building a future also meant confronting the past, and not just the part they shared. One cold Saturday afternoon, Julian invited Evelyn to visit his childhood home. It wasn't far, a quiet 2-story brick house in the suburbs, now empty. He hadn't lived there in years, not since his mother's passing. The place had been cleaned and maintained, but he never had the heart to sell it. They stood in the living room, the furniture gone, but the echoes still lingering. "This was where I used to sketch on the floor," he said, pointing to a corner by the window. "I'd press my back against the heater and pretend I was some tortured artist." Evelyn smiled, running her fingers along the windowsill. "Your mom. She always encouraged me to draw," he said softly, "even when I was supposed to be doing homework. She'd say, 'Better to raise a dreamer than a robot.'" Evelyn turned to him, her voice gentle. "Do you miss her?" "Every day," he admitted. "She would have liked you." "I hope so." Julian reached into a drawer in the hallway, pulling out a photo album. They sat on the floor flipping through it. Pictures of his mother in the garden, of Julian in oversized glasses holding up awards, of Christmases with cheap decorations and warm smiles. Evelyn paused on one photo, a teenage Julian, standing awkwardly next to a decorated locker. In his hands, a sketchbook. "This was your last day of school," she said. He nodded. "She took that right before we drove to the airport to visit my aunt. I didn't even want to go." "Because you thought you'd see me again?" she asked. He looked at her. "Because I was waiting for a letter," he said. She blinked, remembering the one she'd left in his locker. The one he never received. "I used to hate how the universe works," Julian said. "How something as small as a missed note can change a lifetime." "But now," she asked. He looked around the empty room, then back at her. "Now I think the universe just gave us time to become who we needed to be." Evelyn leaned her head on his shoulder. They sat there for hours, flipping through dusty photos, their laughter and silence filling the home with life again. Before they left, Julian locked the door, then turned to her. "Do you think we could make this ours again?" he asked. She blinked. "You mean live here?" He shrugged. "Maybe not now. But someday. Raise a family. Plant a garden. Refill the walls with memories." Evelyn stared up at the house, quiet for a long moment. Then she whispered, "Yes." Back in the city, Evelyn received an unexpected call. Her gallery wanted to feature her newest work, the letter that was never sent, and the space between then and now in a national exhibit. Chicago, Los Angeles, then possibly Europe. It was everything she'd once dreamed of, and it scared her. She told Julian that evening, sitting on the edge of his bed, her fingers twisting the hem of her sleeve. He listened, then said, "You have to go." "But us?" she asked. "We'll figure it out. You're not afraid I'll get lost in it all again?" He stepped closer, resting his hands gently on her hips. "No, because this time I'll be right here when you come home. And if home ever changes for you, then I'll go where you go." Evelyn searched his face, tears rising. "You mean that?" "With everything I am." A month later, they stood at the train station. Not the airport. Evelyn wanted the slow departure, the cinematic goodbye. She held his hand as the whistle blew in the distance. "This isn't goodbye," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's just a page turn." She leaned up and kissed him, long and full of everything they had fought to reclaim. "I'll miss you," she whispered. "I'll miss you more." The train doors opened. She stepped inside, and Julian stood there on the platform, watching her wave as the train pulled away. He didn't cry, because, for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of losing her. She was his, and she was coming back. Evelyn's train had long disappeared from sight, swallowed by distance and rail. But the warmth of her last kiss lingered on Julian's lips like a quiet promise. He stayed on the platform for several minutes after the train had gone, staring at the empty tracks. He wasn't sad, at least not the kind of sadness he used to know. This wasn't grief. This was longing with a destination. It was the kind of ache that had a return ticket. He walked back to his car in silence, opened the door, and paused before getting in. In the passenger seat sat a small envelope she had left for him. His name was written on the front in blue ink, her handwriting unmistakable. He smiled, and then he opened it. "Julian, I wanted to say this in person, but the train was already arriving, and I would have cried, and then you would have cried or pretended not to, and we would have both missed our chance to be brave. So this is me being brave in ink. Thank you for loving me before I loved myself, for waiting even when I didn't ask you to, for reminding me that the heart doesn't keep time the way clocks do. This time, I'm not running away from love. I'm walking toward my dreams, knowing you're part of them now. I'll write you. I'll call you. And I'll come back. Yours, E." Julian folded the letter and tucked it into the inside pocket of his coat, close to his chest. He didn't realize it then, but over the next several months, that letter would be read and reread 100 times, each time like it was the first. Life without her wasn't lonely anymore, just different. His apartment felt quieter, sure. His routines less colorful. But Evelyn wasn't gone. She was just elsewhere, blooming in places he couldn't yet touch but could still feel. They spoke nearly every night, sometimes short calls after gallery events, sometimes long conversations that lasted until sunrise. She sent him pictures of each city, each exhibit. He sent her videos of his morning walks and his terrible attempts at cooking the dishes she had once made for him. He filled his time with work, yes, but also with writing. For the first time since he was a teenager, Julian began journaling again. It started with simple entries, thoughts, feelings, things he wanted to say to her, but didn't want to interrupt her for. Then the entries became letters. "Dear Evelyn, today I saw a little girl with paint on her face running through Central Park. She reminded me of you, full of joy, no hesitation. I miss you like breath. Yours, J." He never sent them. He kept them in a box on his nightstand, tied with a red ribbon. Meanwhile, Evelyn was living a whirlwind, gallery showings, artist panels, interviews. She was praised in articles. One piece described her as a storyteller of emotion, a painter of what's unspoken. She called Julian after reading it. "I think they're talking about you," she said. He laughed. "What makes you say that?" "Because every painting I've made in the last year is you." They didn't say much else that night. They didn't need to. Some love stories don't require constant words, just presence, even from miles away. One afternoon, while walking through the Met Museum alone, Julian found himself staring at a portrait from the 18th century. A woman seated in profile, hands clasped in her lap, eyes looking out a window toward something unseen. He stood there for a long time, thinking of Evelyn. A security guard eventually approached, slightly amused. Beautiful, huh? Julian nodded. She reminds me of someone. The guard smiled. The best ones usually do. Julian walked out of the museum, and for the first time since she left, felt the weight of her absence pull at him. Not painfully, but heavily. Like a reminder of how full his life had become with her in it, and how much fuller it would be when she returned. Then one evening his phone rang. "Hey, stranger," Evelyn's voice came through, softer than usual. He immediately heard something different. "What's wrong?" he asked. She hesitated. "Nothing's wrong. Just something happened. Something unexpected." Julian felt his chest tighten. "Are you okay?" "Yes, I'm fine," she said. "But I've been offered a residency. In Florence. 1 year." Silence. He leaned back in his chair, processing the words. He had always known something like this might happen. She was brilliant. The world would keep opening for her. But knowing it and feeling it were different. "I haven't said yes," she added quickly. "I wanted to talk to you first." Julian swallowed hard. "What do you want?" "I don't know," she whispered. "It's everything I've dreamed of. But I don't want to lose this, us. I don't want distance to become silence again." He nodded slowly, then realized she couldn't see him. "You won't lose me. I promise you that. But a whole year." "I'll visit," he said firmly. "I'll work remotely when I can. We'll make it work." She was quiet again. "Are you sure?" "I waited 20 years to hold your hand," he said softly. "What's one more?" Evelyn choked on a laugh, half crying. "You're not real." He smiled, even though his eyes were misting. "I'm very real, and very much in love with you." She didn't answer with words, just silence and breath, like someone holding a moment too sacred to ruin with language. And then she said, "Then I'll go. I'll paint. I'll grow. And I'll come home to you." Julian closed his eyes. "That's all I'll ever need." The day before she left for Florence, they met at the same train station. But this time, she wasn't alone. Julian had cleared his schedule, packed a bag, and booked a flight to Italy. "I thought you said that I'd wait," he grinned. "I will. But I didn't say I wouldn't also follow." She laughed and threw her arms around him, burying her face in his shoulder. "You're insane," she whispered. "I'm in love," he corrected. They flew to Florence together. And though he couldn't stay for the full year, Julian spent the first 3 months with her, watching her settle into the studio, helping her furnish the apartment, learning just enough Italian to order espresso without embarrassing himself. At night, they sat on her balcony overlooking the city, wrapped in the same blanket from back home. "You know," she said once, resting her head against his chest, "I used to think we missed our chance." He kissed the top of her head. "And now?" She looked up at him, her smile sleepy and full. "Now I think we just took the scenic route." The year passed quietly, beautifully, like the slow unfolding of a flower long kept in the dark. Florence became more than just a city of inspiration. It became theirs. The streets, once foreign, now held memories. Early morning walks to the bakery, where Julian always forgot the word for baguette. Afternoons in the studio where Evelyn's laughter echoed off the high ceilings. And late nights curled up on the balcony, their hands intertwined, as church bells rang in the distance. Julian didn't stay the full year. He had to return to New York for business. But he came back often. He booked flights like someone booking lunch. Time zones stopped mattering. They shared calendars, shared words, shared love in every way that mattered. And yet, they both knew, eventually, it would be time to return home, to truly start their life together. On Evelyn's last day of the residency, she stood in the center of the gallery where her final exhibit was about to open. Her heart raced. The air smelled of fresh paint and lemon oil. Dozens of guests were expected within the hour. Artists, patrons, students, strangers. But the only person she cared about seeing stood near the entrance, wearing a navy blue suit and holding a white envelope in his hand. Julian. He had flown in that morning without telling her, just to surprise her. And she had never loved him more than in that moment. Their eyes met across the room. He walked toward her slowly, every step deliberate, like he wanted to remember the sound of it. When he reached her, he handed her the envelope. She blinked. "What's this?" Your final piece, he said. The one you haven't painted yet. Curious, she opened it. Inside was a letter. Her eyes moved across the page as she read. Evelyn, we have had 1,000 firsts. Our first look across a classroom. Our first dinner after the auction. Our first kiss. Our first shared silence. But there's one first I want more than any other. Our first morning as husband and wife. I've waited half my life to love you. I don't want to wait any longer. Say yes, Evelyn. Say yes to the years we missed. Say yes to the life we still have ahead. Say yes to forever. Julian. Tears welled in her eyes before she could even speak. And then she realized he wasn't holding her hand anymore. He was kneeling, there in the center of the gallery, surrounded by her paintings, by their story told in brushstrokes and pigment. He held out a ring. Not flashy, not overwhelming, just simple, elegant, eternal. Marry me, he said. She covered her mouth with both hands, overwhelmed, shaking, crying, but smiling through it all. And then she dropped to her knees and threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at once. Yes, she whispered into his neck. Yes. Yes to all of it. The gallery doors hadn't even opened yet, but in that moment, they had all they needed. Each other. They returned to New York a month later. The wedding was small, just close friends, a few family members, and a photographer who captured every stolen glance and quiet tear. Evelyn wore a dress she designed herself, soft ivory, with embroidered willow leaves along the hem. Julian wore the same navy suit from the gallery, and the sketch pendant she'd given him sat over his heart, tucked beneath his shirt. They said their vows beneath a willow tree. The willow tree, the one from their school, now standing tall and wide, its roots deep and steady. Fitting. Because that's what they had become. Marriage didn't make their life perfect. They still argued about paint stains on the couch. Julian still forgot to eat when he was too focused on work. Evelyn still had a habit of starting 10 paintings and finishing none. But they chose each other. Every day. Over and over. And it made all the difference. They turned Julian's childhood home into their sanctuary. One wall filled with her art, another with his framed sketches. In the living room hung the space between then and now, and beside it, a new painting Evelyn had completed during her final week in Florence. This one was different. It showed a couple, older, wiser, walking through an art gallery. Around them were paintings of their younger selves, laughing, crying, waiting. But the couple wasn't looking at the art. They were looking at each other. The title? The Love That Waited. Years later, a young girl knocked on their door. She was an art student, nervous, eager. She had read about Evelyn in a magazine and begged for an interview. Julian welcomed her in, handed her tea, and stepped aside as the two women talked in the sunlit studio. The girl asked, "What do you think makes a love story last?" Evelyn smiled, glancing toward the doorway where Julian stood, reading with a cup of coffee. She thought for a moment, then said, "Silence doesn't kill love. Fear does. But the moment you choose courage, the moment you speak, even if it's years later, that's when love begins." The girl wrote every word. Evelyn leaned closer, smiled, and whispered, "And sometimes the longest wait brings the deepest love." That night, Julian handed her a notebook. She opened it. More sketches. More letters. More pieces of their life, captured in pencil and ink. On the last page, he'd written, "Thank you for waiting. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for making our story worth telling. Yours always, Julian." She kissed him. And as the city outside slept, they danced barefoot in the living room, the light from their fireplace flickering across their old paintings, across their new memories, across the faces of two people who had always loved each other, even in silence, even in distance, even before they knew it. Did this story touch your heart? Let us know in the comments. If you've ever believed in second chances, in love that waits, or in the magic of timing, drop a like and subscribe for more stories like this one. And tell us, where are you watching from? We love hearing from every corner of the world. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. We'll see you in the next story.